Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes.
A message from our sponsor, Scrivener. Is your word processor holding you back? Are you constantly breaking your flow to search your computer for vital notes or research? If so, Scrivener can help.
Scrivener is a best-selling app tailor-made for writers, combining all the tools you'll need to craft your first draft. However you write, Scrivener molds to fit your style. Plan everything first or just get writing, and restructure later using the app's integrated outlining tools. Got a good idea but don't know where it fits? Write when inspiration strikes, then find its place later.
Rearrange your plot on virtual index cards in Scrivener's corkboard, or work with an overview of a chapter, a part, or even your whole manuscript using Scrivener's outliner. Break chapters into shorter, more manageable sections, and then edit them in isolation or as a whole.
In Scrivener, you'll find everything you need to get writing and keep writing. Find out why it's the favourite app of best-selling writers and aspiring authors alike by taking the 30-day free trial, or use the code TAKENOTES before 20th of June for a 20% discount on Scrivener for macOS or Windows at www.scrivener.com. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and myself spoke with the novelist Nnedi Okorafor.
We spoke to Nnedi about the hospital stay that led her to start writing, about breaking into the worlds of science fiction and fantasy, and about her latest book, Death of the Author.
It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it.
Nnedi, welcome to Always Take Notes. It's excellent to have you on the show. Can we start with the Death of the Author? You've said it's the story you always wanted to write, but it's taken you 30 years to write it. So tell us about the story and then also why it's taken you a while to produce it.
Yeah, honestly, it's the first thing that I wanted to write, even before everything else that I would go on to write. It's this narrative. It's very much about the Nigerian American experience, and that was one of the first things that when I started writing, it was one of the first things that I wanted to put on paper, because my own experience is very, very specific, and I wasn't seeing a lot of works that would kind of delve into that. And I used to talk about this with my sisters, where we would talk about me writing this narrative about our family, our crazy, crazy family, and just the Nigerian American experience. And I don't know, I wanted to write that narrative, but I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I could, because I knew the way that I wanted to tell the story was going to be pretty complex, and I didn't feel like I could tell it. Also, having the confidence to put something so personal on the page in fiction and kind of, move through a lot of those things, I just wasn't ready for that. And it took me all of these years to finally get there.
Can we talk about the narrative approach in the book, which is quite complex? So it's a story within a story. So following your protagonist Zelu as she writes a novel of her own, Rusted Robots, and then both storylines are mixed with interviews with Zelu's family. Why did you take that approach?
It kind of took me. I don't outline. And I don't write linearly. So when I sat down, I typically just sit down and start writing the thing. And then whatever it becomes is what it becomes. So I did not know, and I'm not one who's really big on structure, either narrative structure at all. But this time I sat down and just started writing this story, and it started with Zelu's narrative, and over time it took this shape. So the shape that this complex structure that it has was very organic. It wasn't something that I planned, which is really crazy considering the way that the book moves, but it wasn't something that I planned, and it was really something that just kind of it honestly wrote itself. Yeah.
How does that work in practice? Do you kind of wake up each day and see what you feel like?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll sit down and I'm the type of writer who does not need a flash of inspiration to write something. I don't need that. I just sit down and just start. And typically, there will be like a scene in my head, like an opening scene. It won't have any connection to anything. I won't know where it's going. I don't know where it came from. Like, it could be in the middle of something, and I've gotten to the point where I'm used to that. I'm not worried about that. But it's vivid. It's a vivid scene of something happening, and I'll sit down and I'll write that. Like, literally, I won't know where it's going. I won't know if it's a novel. I won't know if it's a short story. I won't know anything, but I'll know that scene. And I'll just sit down and start writing that scene. And then by the time I get to the end of that scene, more will come. And then it just keeps happening like that, more and more and more. And sometimes what comes next is not before, or it's not the direct next thing. It could be like at the end, and I'll just write that. And then by the time I finish that, something else pops up. So it's very much like that. So I tend to write linear stories, but I don't write them linearly. So I'll just kind of jump around doing that. And then at some point I will stack it all together and then just edit that and edit that and edit that. And by the time I get to that part, I will notice certain things that I need to strengthen, certain things start coming forth, especially about like when it comes to the structure. So it's in the editing that structure comes. But honestly, with Death of the Author, it just happened, like all of those things just happened naturally.
I was struck right at the beginning of the novel by this scene where you have the Nigerian American characters discussing food, particularly kind of traditional delicacies, and then there's an African American character who's just like, I'll have whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, were you this kind of relationship between Nigerian American culture and wider African American culture, was that something you sort of wanted to get into from the get-go, or did it just evolve as you were working on the novel?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't talk about the Nigerian experience without having that conversation involved in there as well. So yeah, that was very intentional. And it's not a conversation that would take over the story, but it's included in the story. It is literally part of the Nigerian American experience because, gosh, how do I even say this? But being Nigerian American, in my case, two parents that came to the United States in 1969, and then I was born and raised in the United States, right? So being born and raised in the United States, you are in the United States. So you encounter the history and the politics and all of like every aspect, the culture of the United States. And that includes interacting with African Americans. So that those interactions become part of your Nigerian Americanness. So it's all blended together into that one experience. So yeah, in the book, there are African American characters who kind of come through and are part of Zelu's life. Their interaction and their characters were very specific and very, I don't want to say intentional, like I sat there and was like, oh, I have to put an African American in here to discuss this topic. It was more organic than that. You know, Zelu is Zelu. She lives where she lives. She's grown up where she grows up. So therefore, there will be interactions with African Americans, and those interactions will influence who she is and play a role in who she becomes.
I've seen the novel described as your most autobiographical. Is that something you agree with? I mean, you've talked about drawing on those experiences, and also and Zelu's family, you said, is sort of loosely modelled on your own. Do you think it's a fair description to say it's autobiographical, or do you think that oversimplifies things a bit?
Yeah, I would say it's autobiographical. Like, I've written a brief memoir called Broken Places in Outer Spaces. So there's that. So we'll put that aside. When it comes to my fiction, yeah, Death of the Author is my most autobiographical work. Her family, I wouldn't even say loosely. There are little details that are different. Zelu has more siblings than I do. I have multiple siblings. Zelu is Yoruba and Igbo. You know, her mother is Yoruba, her father is Igbo. That's a big deal, first of all. That's significant. But that's a difference. Both of my parents are Igbo. But when it comes to her family dynamic, that's autobiographical. Like I didn't have to make anything up there. And also like her interactions with her siblings. They're siblings that are based directly on my siblings. Her oldest sister her name is Chinyere. My sister's middle name is Chinyere. Zelu's mother is my mother, like, and her father is my father. So yeah, I would definitely say it is my most autobiographical work. It's not to say that other works that I've written don't have parts of me in there, definitely, but they're not as in your face. This one is in your face. Like I read this and I'm like, I know exactly where that came from. And it was real. Yeah.
How did you negotiate that element with your family? Did you show them the text?
Yeah. No. This is one of the things, and I'm glad that I write things this way where, and it started with Who Fears Death, where I wrote that and I did not consider the repercussions, the political repercussions. I didn't consider, and I'm glad I didn't, because if I did, I don't think I would have done some of the things that I did in that book. They were that were really audacious. Same with this one. I knew that I was writing about my family. I knew I was. And it's not just my family. There are things, I'm a professor. I've dealt with things on the professor level. There the things with film adaptations, all of that. I was taking from, those were a lot of it was autobiographical. When it comes to my family, I did talk to my sister about it. But this was after I finished it. I wrote it, didn't worry about that. Like I told myself, I'm not worrying about this. I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to write this, the way that I want to write it without any of the fear of what is anyone going to think? What are my parents going to, I'm not going to think about that. But after I wrote it, after I sold it, that was when I went to my sister and I said, Ify, I've done something. I've done something. And I showed her the first chapter, because chapter 1, that is my sister. That is her on so many levels. So I'm like, I showed her that chapter and I forced her to read it. I was like, you need to read this, just read it, because you got to know what I did here, because I did something here. So yeah, I mean, eventually that became something that I would think about, but in writing it, not at all. I made sure I didn't, because if I thought about it, it would have definitely affected how I wrote it. I would have scaled back a lot. Yeah.
What was their reaction once they had read it?
She was, because my sister is very private. She's very private. She's one of those people who won't even have a profile picture on her Facebook page, like nothing. And she was quiet for a second. And then she's like, oh, you're always doing this. That's what she said. And she sounds like one of the characters in Death of the Author. Like, oh, you're always doing this. You're always doing this. I'm like, okay, you're going to have to read the whole thing now, because I did something in the whole thing. So like there was exasperation and, but also, I don't know, you could tell she was a little bit like, she thought it was cool, so it's a little bit of both. It was complicated. She's prickly like that. So, but it's all good. It's all good.
It's been described as a departure from sci-fi, which is the area of writing where you made your name, but it also includes a sci-fi element in the story, within the story. How do you perceive it yourself in those terms?
I like to say that it's science fiction, but it's also much more. It's much bigger than that. And I don't really see it so much as a departure, because for me, the first thing that I've had published were journalistic pieces. I have a master's in journalism, and I also have a PhD in literature, so I know lots of different types of literature. I'm not a writer who just writes one type of thing. So like for me, it's not a departure. I've written journalistically, and also I've written memoir, and even from the beginning of when I started writing fiction, I didn't categorize myself as a fantasy writer. The first story that I wrote was an autobiographical piece that was set in Nigeria. And it's funny because my creative writing class, when they read it, they automatically said it was fantasy. And it was because of the way that I wrote it. So I've always been kind of on borders of categories. And that's always been a natural place for me, because I don't view myself as one type of writer. I know that it's easier for people to categorize me as either a fantasy writer or science fiction writer, but I definitely don't view myself as just that. I'm just a writer. And a lot of times, like I said, I don't outline, so I don't know what's going to come. I don't know if one of these days I'm going to sit down and just start writing and it's not going to have any speculative elements. I could easily do that. If I did that, it would not surprise me at all. So yeah, that's how I would describe the book. It's bigger than a category. A category can't contain this one. Like I've written other things that a category can contained. But this one, it's a lot. It's a lot. I guess if that were a category, that would be what it's called.
When you were envisaging or writing the Rusted Robots story within the story, was that, again, you'd sat down and it kind of came to you on the page? You don't do the world building kind of big picture imagining before you sit down and do it?
It's interesting because when I wrote this, first it was for the first about 100 pages, it was all Zelu. It was all about this woman who writes this novel, this science fiction novel, and then everything that happens with it. And as I was writing that part, I was, I'm talking about this novel in the story, Rusted Robots, and all this stuff is happening. There's about it, and because of it, and there's so much talk about it. And as I'm writing it, in the back of my head, there's a voice saying, "You need to show your hand." You need to show your hand. And I was so resistant to that idea because it kept so I just go along, just write Zelu's story. And I was resisting it because I'm like, ugh, like, what is it? She's writing this novel about robots and AI in a post-human future, Nigeria. Like, I don't even know what that is. It doesn't even have any human characters. Like, how is that a novel with not even no human characters, but no organic characters? What is that? And the idea of that really intimidated me, and I just avoided it for many pages. And then at some point, that voice in the back of my head got so loud that I was like, okay, I got to do this. And no, I didn't world build. I don't. When it comes to world building, it's like I'm known for my world building. But when I'm writing something, I don't sit down and write pages and pages and diagrams about what the world is like. It's because the whole world is in my head. Like I can see the whole thing in my head and I can carry it. And so the same thing was with Rusted Robots, but I didn't know that until I said, okay, I'm going to just write this thing. let me just write a chapter of this, and maybe I'll just have a chapter appear in the book. And as soon as I started writing that chapter, that whole world just opened up. It was just like, it was like in The Wizard of Oz when she walks out of the house and it's colors for the first time. It was like that. And I knew the world. I knew what it looked like. I knew all the angles of it. And it was fantastically easy to write. And it was so shocking because I had been afraid of writing that. So suddenly I start writing this book that this character's writing, which is really, it was a strange practice for me because I'm writing the character and she's going through all this stuff. And then I'm writing the book that she was writing or that she wrote. And then at one point I was just writing them side by side. Like I would work on Zelu and then I'd pause for a second and then work on Rusted Robot. So like that structure, it just happened. It wasn't planned. It was when I finally stopped and started writing. So I'm like, oh my God. And I didn't worry too much about it because I've learned to do that, like not to worry about the weird things that happen that are unpredictable when I'm writing. But I was writing, I'm like, I don't even know where this is going. I'm writing 2 books at the same time. I don't know where this is going. I just relaxed and just kept doing it. And this book was the result of that.
A piece of terminology that I've heard regarding sci-fi in general is hard sci-fi. Versus, I don't know what the alternative is, but this idea that there's one form of the genre where like all the maths is legitimate, where all the sort of science works out. And I think The Martian's an example of that. Is that a category distinction that you kind of recognize? And then where do you see yourself on that spectrum?
Yeah, I'm aware of hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi. I'm aware of that. And it's nice that people have categories and stuff, but I don't let that dictate. I don't let categories define me. I don't. But you have these 2 categories. I understand what hard sci-fi is and soft sci-fi, and I enjoy both. And I view them more as tools. I'm like, okay, hard sci-fi, everything has to be legit. You're on that demarcation between what currently exists and what can exist, and there's a logic to it. I respect that, and so I would take from that when I was writing Rusted Robots. I would think about so things had to make sense in a way, like this idea of these robots and in their world and the AI, so there's research that I did for that book. So I took from that. And then soft science fiction, I think has fun. I think has fun and doesn't worry. So I took from that too. I'm not going to worry about everything having to be perfectly accurate, or if I wanted to take liberties with something, I felt free to do that. So I was taking from both and not claiming either one.
I saw a story about your research process involving a beluga whale, not in general, in a very specific example, but can you tell the story?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I was writing, that was when I was writing Lagoon. And in Lagoon, there's a scene where a manatee, and they're called sea cows in Nigeria, a manatee takes the main character back to land. And I'm writing this scene, and I love manatees. I think they're adorable and sweet and just wonderful. But when I was writing this, I just wanted to imagine what would a large sea creature feel like, because I was really obsessed with them. Like, what do they feel like? And so when it comes to research, for me, I'd like to get as close to the thing as possible. And if it's not possible to get as close to that thing, I'll find the next best thing. And that's what led me to going to the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago and signing up for Beluga Encounter, where you literally are standing in front. And I know the issues with beluga whales, and they should be all free. Okay, got that. But this was the closest I could get to touching a manatee. So I got to have this encounter with the beluga whale where I got to literally have the wonderful creature swim up to me, and I got to kind of touch his head. And know what that felt like, and also just being near this creature and just the its presence was powerful. So yeah, that's how I like to do my research. I like to get as close to the thing as possible, so that I can not only learn the thing that I sought to learn about it, but also those things that I could never have imagined, because you have to have the experience first.
We wanted in due course to come back to the new book, but can we roll now back to your early life? So you grew up in Chicago, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants. And we touched on this a bit before, but there's often a kind of broader discussion that African immigrants to the US, particularly kind of highly qualified and highly achieving ones, have a different perception of their opportunities and things compared to the wider African American culture. Was that something you were conscious of?
Yeah, I mean, it's on a broader level, it's in a lot of ways the immigrant experience, where your parents, or you, but like your parents come to the United States, and they have an attitude of, this country is not perfect, but it has a lot of great qualities that I am here to grab, and so because of that attitude of, I'm here to take all the, to take advantage of these amazing opportunities, but also, I've come from somewhere else and I want to be the best that I can be. And also, you've come from somewhere else. In order to be really accepted, you have to be the best that you can be, like the best. And yeah, that was definitely my experience. And in terms of specifically Nigerians, Nigerians are, at least the ones that come to the United States, I don't want to speak for all of them, but like they have a great respect for education, a great respect for the transformative power of education. That education is the key to success. Literally, that is the attitude. It is not making a lot of money. It is literally getting as educated as you can possibly be. That is the key to success. So that is kind of imbued on the children. And like in a very strong way, they expect, okay, we came here, we were seeking these opportunities, we got them, now you are to do better. You are to do way better. You have no choice but to do better. And so you bring that combination together, and it translates to, at least in my family, in this family, you are expected to get a university level education, but not just that. you are expected to get a PhD. You get a PhD or the equivalent of a PhD, and it is not a big deal when you get it. It's expected. It's like you're raised. I was raised to get a PhD. Like, it's not a choice. You don't even feel like you're being forced. It's just in your DNA, literally, that you will get a PhD. So then you do, and you're not arrogant about it. You don't go around, shoving it in people's faces. It is something that you do. It is something that is a part of you, and so yeah, it's not a myth.
It's definitely still a big deal, I think.
I'd like to.
There's a bit in the book where Zelly's parents suggest that writing isn't a way to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
They say writers don't make money, doctors, lawyers, and engineers do.
Yeah.
Was that an attitude that you had growing up? I mean, and you were interested in books and reading, but was it kind of, it didn't seem like a viable career path for you?
Yeah. My parents were very big on books, and we had a lot of books in our home. Like, they were just everywhere. And they were just there for you to pick up and just start reading. You were expected to be curious and all of that. But in terms of a career in any kind of arts, it is frowned upon. It's just not. That's not a real career. That is a hobby. That's not a career. Being a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, those are stable careers. I also believe that those are careers where if you have any kind of accent and if you're from somewhere else, you can still excel. Like, I think that's where a lot of that comes from, which doesn't really apply to that next generation. But yeah, so that's the attitude that my parents had. So for me, once I discovered writing, and once I had it's a very dramatic story of how I discovered writing, but once I discovered it, I was obsessed with it. I loved doing it. It wasn't even something that I thought of as a career. I didn't think, oh, I can make money. It was just very basic. I just loved writing. I loved telling stories, and it wasn't even about getting it out to the world. It wasn't even about getting published. I wrote for 8 years without even thinking about getting published. I was not interested. I would write these novels, and then when I finished, I would put it aside and just start another one. I just enjoyed the process of it. But I was so obsessed with it that, and that, I think that's what saved me, and that's what made me able to stand up to my parents. I just loved doing it so much. It was so clear that it was something that I should be doing. And so because of that, when my parents were like, this is not something that you should be doing. For me, it was, I wanted to be an entomologist. I loved bugs. And so they're like, that is a viable area to go into. But I was so obsessed. And I was writing and writing and writing. And that made me able to kind of stand up and be like, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. I don't know how. I don't know anything about publishing, but I want to do this. I really want to do this. And so I just kept doing it. And they kept telling me, no, go into journalism. So that's why I went into journalism, because to them, that was an okay career. I could do that. But while I was studying journalism, I was still writing fiction. And it was around that time when I was working on my master's in journalism that a professor said, oh yeah, you should try to get this story published. And so I did. That led me to getting my first short story published, and then the rest is history. But my family did not acknowledge what it was that I was doing, that it was a career type thing, that it was any kind of big deal until 2008. And that was after my first novel was published in 2005. It still wasn't a big deal. But in 2008, my first novel won the Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature in Nigeria, which had Wole Soyinka himself there when I won, and my family was there when I won. And so they got to watch me pushed to the stage where he was standing, and I remember resisting because I'm like, that's Wole Soyinka. I just can't even do that. And they had like a $25,000 check. And so when that happened, with my family there to witness that, and it was for my novel, that was really the first time they accepted what I was doing. And so, yeah, that's a lot to have to do for your family to accept you, but there it is.
And you were a competitive athlete as a young person. You played tennis in particular to a very high standard, but then an operation in your teens went wrong. This seemed to have been a very formative experience for you, but also to what extent has that worked it into the new novel in terms of Zélu's experience?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's one of the inspirations for Zélu's experience. Yeah, I played semi-pro tennis from the age of 9, and then I also was a track star as well. It's very athletic. Being an athlete, that was just something that came both of my parents were athletes. My mom made the Olympic team in the javelin, the Nigerian Olympic team throwing the javelin, and my dad was a nationally known hurdler. And so I come from that, and my siblings we were all athletic. And yeah, so I was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was 13, and a lot of people have it, but mine was extremely aggressive, and it got worse and worse and worse, even though I was performing at this high level. And so by the time I was in my first year, after my first year of the university, they did an X-ray and were like, we need to do surgery on this, and if we don't do this, you're going to be like basically bent over. And your life's going to be significantly shortened. And so I had this surgery, and that's what led to, and I was on the tennis team at that time. And when I had the surgery, there was a complication, which was I woke up paralyzed 8 hours after and they didn't know why, and they didn't know if I would ever walk again. So that's really when I started writing. It was in that hospital bed in the first few days where I just was going crazy. And it's funny because, and this is how all these things tie together, because what happened was in those first few days, when I was like losing my mind in that bed, I had a copy of I, Robot, and I was in too much pain to read it. And so I picked it up and I just started writing in the edges. And I wrote this story about this woman who could fly, and it makes sense where that comes from. But because when you can fly, you don't have to walk. But that was the first story that I wrote. And so eventually I learned how to walk, but that was relearn how to walk. That is a very big summary of something, like the biggest time, like one of the biggest situations in my life. But like that was, when we think of the title, Death of the Author, I think about that moment, because that moment was a death for me, especially when I look back on it. It was a death because it was like, my whole identity was as an athlete. I was an athlete. I was going to be an entomologist, but I was like really focused on the athletics at that time. I was just discovering what it was to train. I had been the top female athlete of Illinois the year before, and I'd won all these medals, all of those things, and then suddenly the rug was pulled from under me, and it was a death, because like the way I was going this way, and then suddenly I was going that way. And so yeah, the title ties into that, it ties into that aspect, the autobiographical side of it. So all of those things for Zélu, I put all that in Zélu. I put like the pain of it, that death for Zélu when things happen for her. And the fact that she, in her character, she's paraplegic, and that's what she is. That was really me exploring this idea of what if I'd never walked again, because I easily could have never walked again. Who would I have been if I never walked again? So there's that. There are lots of sections where Zélu has to deal with being paraplegic, what happens to her early on, no spoilers, but there are sections there, and when I wrote those sections, there's a lot of detail, and the reason for that detail, I could write it. Like I was telling, speaking exactly from my own experience. I did not have to make that up. There are many aspects of her experience where I'm just pulling from things that I've experienced. So yeah, I mean that connection between who Zélu is and what she goes through and what I went through, it's very strong.
Thank you for sharing that. It must have been a really difficult part of your life.
Yeah.
Technology really helps Zélu in the novel. Do you think, in general, that you're a techno-optimist, that for people that have physical disabilities, technology offers them a different kind of freedom?
Very much so, yes. Yes, that is like that's something that I think about often, and I think about technology from the perspective of somebody with disabilities. It's often the way that I come at it, and so because of that, a lot of times I'm more optimistic than most. I have a lot of hope and interest. So, for example, when I think of autonomous vehicles, I'm not thinking about, oh, they're going to kill us all. Like, I'm not thinking in that direction. I'm thinking these things will be freedom for some people, you know, and we deal with that. We deal with that in the book. When I think about AI, I think about, I know all the problems. I can talk about all the problems with it, but I also think about how AI can help people with disabilities. Like, technology is something that I think can really be a hopeful thing, especially when you look at it from the point of view of people with disabilities. There's so much, and I think that theme is strong in Death of the Author.
A notice for supporters of Always Take Notes. We are overhauling our offering on the crowdfunding site Patreon.
Our central offer for those who support the show is a sheaf of successful journalistic pitches, which we've solicited from friends of Always Take Notes. Now greatly expanded, the package runs to more than 100 pages.
For those who may not know, a pitch is the document, generally sent by email, that lays out the idea for an article. And we've assembled a huge collection of battle-tested examples that all worked in the real world. Every one of them led to an article getting commissioned.
In the package, we now have successful pitches to, among others, The New York Times, The Guardian, The New Yorker, The Financial Times, The Economist, The London Review of Books, Vanity Fair, Outside Magazine, The Spectator, The Sunday Times, Esquire, Granta, The Literary Review, Bloomberg Businessweek, and GQ.
Anyone who supports the show with $5 a month or more will receive the full compendium.
For those who contribute $10 per month, we'll also add a signed copy of our new podcast book, which is filled with more real-world advice from past guests on Always Take Notes.
Those who pay $15 a month can join a monthly call with Simon and myself to discuss any aspect of their writing lives.
We're keen for the pitch compendium to be a living and constantly growing document, so if any listeners have successful pitches of their own they'd like to include, do get in touch with us through the podcast website. In every case, we redact the editor's name and email address, so no one is breaking confidences by contributing. We always like on the podcast to ask how people broke into the industry and particularly how they got their work published initially. Now, you touched a bit on this earlier with the prize in 2008, but could you tell us, going back a bit further, how you first started getting your work out there and then the route to getting Zara the Windseeker published in 2005?
Yeah. When everything happened for me with the paralysis and like my whole identity was just shattered, I stopped planning. Like, I don't have goals because I don't know, just and it may be a little bit PTSD, but I don't know. I just feel like when you make plans, when you think things are going in a certain direction, they can just be destroyed, and that's something I've always I think about a lot. So the way that I've approached publishing or getting published is with that attitude. I don't plan. I don't think about, like, I'm not looking at trends. I'm not looking at, oh, this has been done before, and so therefore I can do it, or this has never been done before, I should worry about whether I can do it. It's never crossed my mind. I'm not looking at any of that. What the standpoint that I come from is joy. I just loved writing. I loved telling these stories, so I told them. When I wrote Zara the Windseeker, and Zara the Windseeker was not the first novel I wrote, it was like the fourth or fifth, and it was probably the third novel that I wrote that was publishable. It was not the first novel that my agent shopped around. I was kicked around a lot. There were two novels I wrote before Zara the Windseeker that were basically way ahead of their time. Like, they were getting rejected because, one, they kept telling me, they're like, we don't know if this character is Nigerian or American. We can't market this. We don't know what this is. And we don't know if this is a literary or a fantasy or science fiction book. We don't know what this is. So we can't, I was told that a lot with those two earlier novels. So and one like as a writer, one thing I've always done is when I finished a book and it's out, like my agent is shopping it around, I'm working on something else. So like I didn't have goals. I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to publish this before I'm this age, or oh, I want to do this. I want to win this award. It's never, none of those things have ever been in my head. I just do. I just create I create the narrative, and I enjoy creating the narrative, and then I put it out there and see what happens. It's always been, let's see what happens with this. So with Zara the Windseeker, it was, God, there were a lot of serendipitous things that happened with Zara the Windseeker. I wrote Zara the Windseeker as one of my novels was getting kicked around and misunderstood left and right. And that's one thing I always tell new writers, to always be working on something else when you have something that you submitted, always, because then it just makes you feel better. Just makes you feel better. And you know, so I wrote Zara the Windseeker, and I happened to know, I wrote this thing. Zara the Windseeker was this science fiction fantasy thing, and deeply rooted in Nigerian culture, politics, and cosmology, like deeply rooted in that. This was so it was published in 2005, but so we're thinking 2004. There was no such thing at that time. Like, there was no opening, no understanding of that kind of story. And because I didn't care about those things, I'm like not looking to see if there's anything like it. But I intuitively also knew that the only way, it's not going to have a normal path. I knew that. And I'm familiar with that because I'm the child of immigrants. And that's what I've been told from day one, that you may not have the average path. But you have to find a way. You will find a way. That comes from my parents. So I knew that with Zara the Windseeker. I'm like, okay, this is going to be different. I don't know. I just kind of followed my joy and followed my heart. And because of that, I went to I'm a reader as well, and I ended up being at an event with an author whose work I loved. I loved her work. I was not there to ask her for anything. I wasn't there for whatever, but I ended up meeting this author, and she gave me her contact information. And then at some point I was telling her about, and this was later, I was telling her about Zara the Windseeker and how it was a strange book and whatever. And then she's like, oh, you should talk to my agent, my first agent. She might be interested in that. Talk to that first agent. That's how I got my first agent. And then when my agent was shopping Zara around, she didn't even have to shop it around. She only had one person to show it to. And it was this particular, she was the head of the children's department, an editor at the head of the children's department at Houghton Mifflin. And I knew her name, and because she was the editor of Virginia Hamilton, whose work that I loved, and I just knew about that only because I love Virginia Hamilton's work, and I was like, show it to her. She's the one who will understand this. And this editor happened to also be African American, and she read Zara the Windseeker and was like, yes, and immediately just snapped it up. And she didn't have to show it to anyone. Because she was the publisher and an editor. And so she didn't have to show it to the money people and have to convince them of this book that was rooted in Nigerian culture, that's science fiction and fantasy. She didn't have to do that. And that was how Zara the Windseeker happened. So yeah, I mean, it's been, and then my second novel was kind of a similar story as well. It was just this kind of path where I kind of just did the things that I enjoy doing. And then I wouldn't say things just happened, because things didn't just happen. There was an intentionality to it, but I kind of just followed the joy and the interest in what I was doing. And that has always led me to where I need to go.
Was there a moment when things really exploded for you in terms of sales and popularity and coverage? Was it winning that prize with the comically large check, or was there a different moment of realization for you?
I think that for me, my trajectory has been very gradual. It's like there are peaks that I've had, but it's been very gradual. It's been a slow burn. And the thing about slow burns versus hot, immediate flashes is slow burns have time to get warm and solid and stable. So because of that slow burn, as opposed to something that's a big flash where it burns out quickly, I've been able to kind of, build my, and I say build my audience like I actually did that on purpose. I did not. I was just writing these stories and seeing where they go. Like, 'cause that's always been my attitude. But because of that slowness, things are where they are now. But I think one peak was, the Wole Soyinka Prize. That was a beginning. But the first real peak was Who Fears Death. It was Who Fears Death. When that one hit, there were suddenly many more reviews, and there was just an awareness of Nettie, because Who Fears Death, and once again that one's an adult novel. That was my first adult novel, which is an interesting observation to make. But I think that a lot more people started discovering me more with Who Fears Death. And Who Fears Death, that one was the one that was optioned by HBO and all of that. But even after that, the Akato Witch came. That was right after Who Fears Death, and that one gathered, like, talk about a slow burn. Like, the sales for that were small at first, and then those just kept going up and up and up. And even I remember my publisher being like, "This is surprising." I'm like, wow, I shouldn't be here. Anyway, but and the same with Zara the Windseeker. Zara the Windseeker has gradually gained more popularity as things just kind of, as the ball just kind of rolls and gets bigger and bigger. But really, it's been a gradual thing for me.
You're quite right in the novel about creative writing, higher education, and this is an area that you have experience in and things like that. What's your view? This idea that you kind of receive from your parents that you must get a BA and then masters and then a PhD. Do you think that's a good route for someone with creative writing ambitions to take?
I think it depends on the writer, because for me, it's like, I'm a very specific example. I started writing in a creative writing class. Like, the things happened to me in the hospital, and then 2 semesters, I think it's maybe one or 2 semesters later, when I returned to the university with a cane, a friend of mine was like, "You should take a creative writing class." When I took that class, I had no idea what it was. I just liked the guy who told me to take the class, and I took the class, and that was how I learned what creative writing was. And then in that class, I started writing short stories and learning the craft. So I'm a product of creative writing classes, and I don't think everyone is that. I think there are many different paths to becoming a writer. Also, for me, I have a BA, I have 2 masters and a PhD, and those weren't so much about like learning how to write. It was just bigger. It's just big. It was bigger than that. It was like, it was a full body experience for me. It was a coming of age. Like, my coming of age really was during my BA, and it wasn't just the classes. It wasn't just the degree. It was the whole atmosphere of the university. And I could say that for all of my degrees as well. Like, and that's why in almost all of my novels, you see a representation of libraries in them, in books. There's a reason for that, because I love, like, libraries are magical places and places of power, and places of resistance and rebellion and understanding, all of that. And that's part of my university experience, like having all of these degrees, and that's a lot of school, coming from the parents that I come from. It all comes together. So I'm a very specific example. Like, the way that I became a writer was because of the university, but not in the way that a lot of people assume. It wasn't about taking classes. It wasn't about reading and having professors teach me how to write. It was the full body effect of the university, the bubble of the university, all of that. And I think my university experience was different from a lot of people. So there are writers who don't need that. They can come to being a writer in a different way. They don't need the university at all. They don't need to take classes. They don't need that environment. So I think it really depends on the person.
The joy of libraries is an enduring theme of the podcast and the conversations we have on it. Can we talk about some of your work in other modes? So you've written comic books, screenplays, things like that. What do those mediums offer you that novels don't, and vice versa? What does a novel offer that they don't?
I like learning. Like, I mean, I have this. The degrees should be an indication. I like learning. I like learning new things. I like learning, and I'm obsessed with narrative, and comics, screenwriting, plays, even journalistic writing, creative nonfiction, memoir, and then of course prose. All of those, they're all different. They're different ways of narrative, different methods and modes of narrative, and I am obsessed with all of them. I just love even their positives and their negatives. I love all of those, and I don't know. I just think that they all have their goods, their positives and negatives, but like. I also think primarily I'm a fiction, like a novelist, novella writer, long form prose. That's my heart. But all these other ways of storytelling, there are tools. They all have tools that I can learn and dabble in and revel in and use. And when I write a screenplay, I will write, sometimes I'll take things from novel writing into the screenplay and vice versa. There are things that I've taken from writing comics and screenplays that I use in novel writing. I just love all the different types and how they play off of each other and how they're also their own thing as well. And they're things that each of them can do that none of the other mediums can do. It's fascinating.
It's a rule of the podcast that we always ask about money and how it's related to people's writing lives. So be as open or as guarded as you're comfortable. But how has that part worked, both when you were doing this long period of studying for different degrees and then as your career has developed?
Money has no influence on what I write. I can honestly say that. I was a professor for 8 years, and all through that, I was writing. I was a lot of my novels were written at those times. And that was one of the things that my parents raised me to, like, so there's always this push and pull, and you get it in Death of the Author, where it's like, you're in this, but you also you've got the community and the individual. So for me, the community part was, I always hear my dad's voice in my head of money, money, money. If it doesn't make money, it has no worth. So like I was raised to, you don't struggle. I'm not raised to be a starving artist. So always I would have a source of income. But at the same time, I love doing what I do. That part of it is separate. So it's like, in other words, I have a day job. My day job was being a professor, and that was intentional. But as I'm doing my day job, I have my writing, which is separate, and it's not something that the day job would ever extinguish. It's just you have to find a way to do both. So, like, when did I finish? I can't even remember. But a lot of my novels were written when I was a professor. I wrote them while I was a professor full time. So like I'm writing full time. I was a full-time professor. I was teaching full-time, also doing events full-time. I was doing all of those things all at the same time. So therefore, had a source of income, was very stable. Like I was not just a professor, I was a tenured professor, tenured associate level professor. So that's stable source of income. And so therefore, I could write whatever I wanted. So money was not something where I'm like, okay, let me just write this commercial thing so I can make this amount. No, I wrote literally what I wanted to write, and I didn't care about whether it would make money or not. Like I had complete, and I can say this even now looking back, I had complete and total freedom in what I was writing. There was nothing dictating what I was writing except for my muse, and I always felt that those things needed to be separate because I'm not here. I feel like I'm not here to make money as a writer. I'm here to create the stories that I want to create and hopefully put them out into the world. That part is not even part of the equation. It's really just write the stories that I wanna write. And it's funny because that has worked for me, because that has made me lots of money. It's like, you don't think and I've said this. It's like the more if you think too hard about money when you're a creative, the money is going to run away from you. You have to kind of like turn your back to it and do what you're doing, and it kind of follows you because it wants your attention. That sounds crazy, but yeah, that's how I feel.
I guess Ellie has a slightly different experience. I mean, early on when she's writing, and she says she doesn't have enough money even for a McDonald's Happy Meal. So
yeah, I mean, the decisions that I made, like I wasn't going to, I never wanted to rely on my writing for my livelihood, because I felt like that would kill anything that I'm trying to do, because I knew I was writing something that was new in so many ways. And if you're writing something that's new, it's going to have a more difficult path. I've always been aware of that. It's going to have a more difficult path. So I knew I had to have, day job is a small way of putting it. I mean, I'm a full-time tenured professor. That's more than a day job. And so like the decisions that I made early on.
Are you still?
No, I'm a professor of practice now, which means I don't have to teach classes. So yeah. But the decisions that I made early on were so that I would not be in a position where I can't afford a Happy Meal.
We're coming
I eat Happy Meals though, but yeah.
We're coming towards the end of our time, but last question from me. What is the geographic spread of your audience? To what extent is it in the United States or in Europe, and also in Africa itself?
I don't know. I don't know. I would think that I do I have work that's published in Nigeria, and I was recently there in November for the release of my novella She Who Knows, the first book in that series, and they're publishing Death of the Author as well in Nigeria. So I have an audience there, and it's growing. The publishing industry the publishing industry is complicated over there, but I do have a growing audience there, and some of my other works have been published there too, and they've had to rename them because Akata witch is a lot of the word witch. That's a whole other conversation, but yeah, so yeah, Nigeria, but I guess primarily North America. That's where I live, and that's where my work is published first and foremost. Gradually, I think that I've had work published worldwide. I've had work published in France, Italy. I can't even. China, Japan. Like I have a lot of international publication, so it's not great, but I don't pay too close attention to it. Germany as well, but I don't pay too close attention, because to do that, I feel like it messes with what it is that I'm creating. That kind of focus can just. It will inevitably shift things in a way that I don't think is very helpful. But yeah, I do have a broad international audience.
And as a final question from me, I wanted to get your thoughts on where you situate your work within the wider science fiction landscape. You've talked about this a lot in the past, but I was particularly taken with your octopus analogy, if you wouldn't mind sharing it with listeners.
Yes. When it comes to science fiction, there are, and I don't even want to say I believe there are, because there are multiple bloodlines, multiple literary bloodlines of science fiction. It's not just one. Not everything is inspired by the classics. The classic science fiction narratives, which are predominantly white and male. Not everything comes from that. I mean, those narratives are great, but not everything comes from that. And I'm a prime example of that. I've read some of those things, but growing up, I didn't read a lot of science fiction, because it just, the worlds that I was seeing portrayed were very cold, and white and male. But it's not that I have to see a reflection of myself in the narrative. I just have to feel like I could exist in those worlds. And in those worlds, I didn't even feel like I could exist. So I would just, I wasn't conscious of it when I was a kid, but I would just gradually migrate away from those narratives. For me, I started writing science fiction because of trips to Nigeria, like literally trips to Nigeria. As I got older, first, the fantastical speculative stories were also trips to Nigeria. But as I got older, I started noticing, especially when cell phones showed up, I would go to the village. And so you'd have these very rural places where you'd have these beautiful houses, but there would be no electricity or running water in those houses. And you're seeing cell phones showing up in that kind of place. And I was fascinated by that. And then I started thinking about what is the future going to be like here, where you have this supercomputer that's chargeable and portable, and then you don't have this infrastructure there. Like, what is the future going to be like there? I wasn't seeing that written about, because first I'm a reader, then a writer. I wasn't seeing those things written about. And so I just started writing it myself. That's what led me to start writing science fiction. I can name multiple examples of writers who started writing science fiction because of their own culture, right? So I use the octopus analogy because with the octopus's intelligence are extremely intelligent, and if they lived longer, they would be more intelligent than human beings. And so their intelligence has evolved on a different. Their intelligence didn't evolve in the same line as human intelligence. So I see it. The different bloodlines of science fiction are similar, where you have different types of science fiction that have evolved from different inspirations, and a lot of them are cultural. And I think that's a great thing. I think it makes for a lot more stories, a lot more visions of the future that we should all want to see.
Well, look, thank you very much, Nnedi, and wishing you all the best with Death of the Author and all your other projects.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Nnedi Okorafor. She's on Instagram at Nnedi Okorafor. She's on Twitter at Nnedi. And Death of the Author is published by Glance.
Before we get into the rest of the outro, we have another supporter of the podcast on the crowdfunding site Patreon to thank. This is Paulina Baklakova. She's a Canadian freelance journalist based in Copenhagen in Denmark. She reports primarily on feminist issues, including migration, sex work, and more. And you can find her work in Al Jazeera, the BBC, Open Democracy, Unbiased News, and other media. And she's currently working on a cross-border investigation about sex work and tech platforms. Paulina, we really appreciate your support for the show. Rachel, what was your takeaway from the interview with Nnedi?
Well, it was really nice to sit down with Nnedi in person, and I also enjoyed getting stuck into Death of the Author. Fantasy and science fiction isn't a world I know a huge amount about, so it was great to hear more about her career and how it's taken shape, and how kind of attitudes towards those genres have evolved over the years. I mean, it's obviously a huge industry now. We didn't really get time to get into the specifics of her different series, nor how she finds the experience of writing in different forms, which she does a lot of. But I thought it was a really wide-ranging and enjoyable conversation. How about you, Simon?
Yeah, it was interesting to do it in person because we haven't done that for a while. I thought she was doing very well given how she just stepped off a plane from America and was dealing with some pretty savage jet lag. We also had a really interesting conversation off air afterwards about a piece of jewellery she had modelled on a trilobite, which is a animal that was very dear to my father's heart. But I thought what was particularly interesting was her kind of takeaway on the sort of university creative writing world, which she has participated in herself, and also she kind of satirises a bit in the novel. So I thought that was good. And yeah, obviously these sort of We've had romance writers on before. We haven't had a science fiction writer on before, so that was, I think, an important note to take. And she was quite thoughtful on the extent to which writers of African heritage in the West have readerships within Africa as well, which is an interesting area that we've discussed elsewhere. Anyway, Rachel, what have you been up to, and what have you been consuming in cultural matters?
So I have published a piece which has been a long time in the making. It's a profile of Shonda Rhimes, the showrunner behind things like Bridgerton and Grey's Anatomy. Simon, you have this a lot, but it's funny when you do a profile, because especially one that's only 1,200 words. I mean, I did hours and hours and hours of interviews, and you mentioned 2 people or 3 people, so I feel you always feel a little bit guilty that you spent a lot of time talking to very influential and successful people, but in the end, you have to use the stuff that makes most sense. So anyway, but that piece is out, which is great. And in terms of things I have been consuming, I've been, like the rest of the world, watching Adolescence. And just to flag,
by a former ATN guest.
We interviewed Jack Thorne, so anyone who enjoyed that show should check out that interview from a couple of years ago. And I've also been watching another Stephen Graham, Erin Doherty combination, which is 1,000 Blows by Stephen Knight, which is on Disney Plus. It's about the world of it's about a female criminal gang in the 1880s, and it's also about the world of kind of bare knuckle boxing. So that's very enjoyable. And how about you?
Is that the one that's being advertised on buses at the moment?
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the buses, but it would make sense. And what have you been up to, Simon?
I am in Zurich as we speak. I've been in Switzerland writing a magazine piece, or researching a magazine piece about a language called Romansh, which is, as we were discussing off air, is spoken by a small community of about 35,000 people, but has no standard written form. It has 5 different sub-variations, and the story is about the often vexed attempts to create a single Romansh to rule them all. So that's been interesting. I was in Canton Graubünden in the southwest of the country, and I'm now in Zurich. So it's been a kind of whirlwind visit, but I'm flying back tomorrow. That's good. And then in terms of what I've been reading, I've just finished this book, I think I mentioned it last time, called Le Cheminot de la Montagne, so the vagabond or the tramp of the mountains, by a French author called Jacques Dieterlen, which I was reading for my book, which I think is actually, it's completely unknown in Britain. It's out of print in France for years, but it's a very, very beautiful book about a First World War veteran who crossed the entire kind of arc of the Alps on skis in 1933. So that was actually a rather beautiful thing. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jessica Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. We're on Twitter at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support the crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to get in touch with us via our website or leave a review on iTunes, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.